when I had the original concept for News Story, we worked nights and weekends trying to get that first house funded and built. That was it. That took us months. We got it done, and then we set our next goal, which I think was 10 houses. Start small, set achievable goals that you can get momentum on. And I think that way more people are capable of that than they realize. If you're willing to do something that is different like this, something that's more daring, something that's a little out there, that's scarce. I figured out at a younger age that you have the agency to do stuff and to go out there and to be different. And when you're being different, what that's doing is it's attracting the types of people or resources that a normal person wouldn't be able to attract. You can do it at a younger age to get started. And that was certainly our journey when we were 24 and 25-year-old kids.
In 2010, when we started Whiteboard, the sort of hook that we were sort of trying to at least communicate at the time was, how can we empower visionary leaders to lead meaningful brands? And Brett Hagler
It's a good hook. You must be a creative guy.
Brett Hagler, you are the archetype of the type of people that we just always aspired to sort of come alongside, serve, whether in a big way or a small way. And I know there's lots of overlapping circles and lots of mutual friends that are sort of in our orbit. But Brett, I'm so thankful that you made time to do this. News Story is in the work of ending homelessness and creating solutions to do that. And this conversation's gonna sort of trail into all the ways that y'all have just stayed locked in on that big vision over the past, how many years now?
More than 10. About 10.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great that Whiteboard has a pod. It's an honor to be
That's
on
right.
with you guys. So thank you.
Well, take us back to the beginning. How'd it start? Who are you with?
It started when I was about 2 years out of college. So I've gotten a little older now. And I look back and I was 23 and I was on a mission trip to Haiti. It was my first time that I've ever gone on an experience like that. Right out of college, I had a big life change, which for me was about becoming a Christian. And that just really changed my perspective and my interest. And so that ended up sending me down on a trip to Haiti. And I went down there a couple years after the 2010 earthquake. I always loved entrepreneurship and I loved startups. But I didn't think in college or in high school that the kind of intersection of entrepreneurship and helping people in need would overlap as early as it did. But yeah, going on that trip, seeing kids and parents that don't have life's most basic human needs when it comes to safety and shelter. And the one place that, anybody listening would say, home is everything. When you don't have that, it just hit me that it was nearly impossible to actualize your potential and become who I think you have a chance to be. And so that was the earliest days. Looking back, as I mentioned, I loved startups. And so I actually I started a for-profit company right out of college. That was the first thing I did. It was an e-commerce company. It ended up not working. We tried to set up an e-commerce platform and we resold products. And this was back in the day when like Tom's and Warby Parker, everybody was doing the buy one, give one. And so
Yep.
we were trying to get on that bandwagon. And we had this concept where we would, every time somebody bought this product, which was kind of like we try to have these like curated products that were hard to find, but like really cool. And when you bought it, you would basically have a chance to give to a charity, and we were transparent about who that was. And so one of the charities was Charity Water, which is amazing. And I'm sure many folks listening are aware of Charity Water and Scott Harrison. And another one was an organization based in Haiti called Mission of Hope. And that was who we actually ended up building thousands of homes with and who I went on this mission trip with. So that was kind of the earliest days. And I mentioned the for-profit startup because one, it was the stepping stone that actually got me on this trip. It ended up failing, but it ended up teaching me so much right out of college. And it also ended up teaching me or I started learning about principles from this startup accelerator out in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator. And Y Combinator was teaching startups back then, like Airbnb and DoorDash and Coinbase, how to get their first customers, all these, early tricks and hacks. And I got obsessed with trying to learn those things. And that was why when we started News Story, we applied to Y Combinator because we had already been learning from their resources and became one of the first nonprofits to go through their program, which was completely game changing, and that was back in summer 2015. So I'll stop there.
I love it. I love it. Um, I think one of the things, that I'm really interested in is you, along with some co-founders, started New Story from Atlanta. Is that
Mhm.
was day zero Atlanta?
That's right.
Tell me about the early days. Tell me what the culture was like, and tell me what was the main problem that y'all sort of locked into that you're like, hey, I think we can
Mm.
double down and solve this one.
Okay, I'll answer that in two parts. With the early days, I'll just try to recall what comes to my mind. I mean, at my age, I was 24. Um, I was in a season of my life where I was extremely excited about entrepreneurship. I was in a season where really all I cared about was learning about entrepreneurship and my newly found faith. And so uh, it was a season where I was basically obsessed with building New Story. Is the most honest answer. And I wasn't yet married. I didn't have kids. I just saw this vision and got hooked. And then a couple months into the very beginning idea of New Story, we got accepted into White Combinator. And that was just electric. I mean, it was like a shot of the biggest dose of momentum and opportunity that a younger entrepreneur could ever imagine. And we just made the most of it. And so I met three amazing co-founders. They were kind of divinely put into my life and into News Story. And the honest answer, man, is we just got after it. We just got after it for our first couple years. I do not regret it. We worked so hard. We were so excited, and we were fortunate to have things go our way early. So there was some, there was tailwinds behind us. There was momentum, and so I think that helped even cultivate more excitement and hunger for what we were doing. And so yeah, it was like the very beginning. We started out by we've always focused on housing. What we do today is completely different than how we started out with how we deliver our mission, but the mission has always been about the housing crisis. Back in the day, the initial problem that we were trying to solve was housing, but there's always these like problems behind the problem. And so the problems behind the housing problem back then that we were working on was from a charitable perspective, there was a big lack of trust and a lack of transparency for um, when you were trying to give to international organizations. And this was actually after the earthquake in Haiti, and there was just all these like bad articles, and the kind of the natural thinking was I can't trust these, international charities. I don't know where the money goes. I don't know how it's being spent. I'm seeing this article about this big organization raises a couple $100 million and they've only built a few homes, and naturally you're very skeptical, right? And so the entrepreneur side in us said, we want to call those things out and say, we feel these too. And we feel like there's no transparency. It's so hard to know where your money goes. It's so hard to know the impact. You're not, we agree that, that you shouldn't use volunteers, but you should actually use local labor. Like, we basically made a list of all the objections that many people rightly had, and we said News Story is doing the opposite. So we positioned ourselves in the beginning as the kind of the counter to why somebody wouldn't give. And the main reason why somebody wouldn't give was not because they didn't want to help a family get access to a home. The main reason was because of the kind of the medium to get there was not trustworthy. And so that was the very beginning. And we did a campaign, from a marketing campaign, our first summer, of trying to do 100 houses in 100 days. That was the campaign. And we ended up doing a little more than 100 homes in 100 days. And the Red Cross did, I think, only about 12 homes that summer. So you had this contrast of this earlier stage, kind of more modern thinking, blah blah blah. These younger founders, Y Combinator, and that was all in our first year. And so that was long way of answering your question, Eric. That was kind of how things got started. And then the last thing I'll say is we always had this in our DNA, like wanting to challenge the status quo and wanting to challenge um wanting to, now we say, pioneer, like pioneer new solutions. And what started out as a couple basically kids trying to create a more transparent version to give has now over a decade completely evolved into trying to transform and pioneer how you do financing, how you create capital markets for underserved families. It's completely evolved. But the kind of core DNA was like, how do we figure out what's not working and then try to come up with solutions for why it's not working and then try it. And that's what we've done for about a decade.
I love it. Well, and I think anybody who's familiar with your work, innovation is sort of the silver lining that you can sort of see all across the New Story portfolio, all across your mission, all across your work. I know one of the more fascinating case studies is just oriented around everything y'all did to build the first 3D printed community, and then even pulling that to now a real focus on land ownership. What were the lessons learned of like, hey, we're still doing 3D printed home, we're still going to build this, we're still building them, but at the same time too, adding this perspective around land ownership that I think is really compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I think for entrepreneurs or folks that are, I mean, that are early in the journey, or even if you're later on in the journey, I mean, you learn by doing, right? So I'm going to kind of reverse engineer how things happen. But if you would have told me 6 years ago that I would have been obsessed with land and infrastructure and legal property titles and credit profiles and access to financing, I would have probably rolled my eyes, because that didn't seem like, at the time, exciting, innovative, and so now I am obsessed about those things, and I will explain why. And so I think as time has gone on and you get out there and you're trying projects and you're learning, and if you have a culture of continuous learning and continuous improvement as we do, you're always trying to get better, right? You're trying to say, like, how do we get more leverage in this? How do we get more impact from this model? What would it take to evolve to this? And that said, is a dichotomy, because you don't want to always be changing, right? You want to have it's dichotomy. You want to have focus and creativity, right? It's not one or the other. It's both, which is hard. but that's so much about what leadership and entrepreneurship is. And so for us, we've learned by doing, and on 3D printing, which is about as cool as it gets from an innovation standpoint. Yes, we were part of um, literally creating the first neighborhood of 3D printed houses in the world with our partner called Icon, which is based in Austin, Texas. The idea there, kind of again back to what I said of having the status quo challenging like DNA. This problem was the actual home construction costs seems too high. How do we take a risk and use technology to try to reduce the direct costs of home construction? And so we thought, and we looked at things, and we continue to look at things like modular and prefab and you name it. But 3D printing was very interesting to us. And so, long story short, we decided to take a calculated risk and use some of our philanthropic funding to do an R&D project and essentially invest into this incredible, very early stage startup called Icon. And we were the first R&D money into the company, and that was able to produce the first machine that ever 3D printed a house in the United States. And that happened back in 2018. And then from there, which was a success. So we took a risk, and the odds were that it wasn't going to work. The odds were that it would be too crazy and would fail. But it didn't, and it worked. And then from there, we were able to 3D print the first neighborhood of homes in history in Mexico, and Apple TV actually did a documentary about that. And so yeah, so if we kind of take those two examples together, so we believe and still believe that the home construction cost of just the actual materials of the home itself needs to be reduced, right? That's the 3D printing example. What we also learned is there are so many more pieces to the housing puzzle than we really understood. So when you think about it from a first principles perspective, what we learned is that the big idea is, how do you help a family in El Salvador or Mexico or Guatemala, that we've worked in Latin America now as our focus? How do you help them not have a free home or a home gifted or subsidized by the government, but how do you help them get a loan so that they can actually pay for the home themselves? And when you bring that into the equation, then a lot changes, because then you have to think about how do you help the family build a credit profile? How do you help them own an asset that could then be used as collateral? So that's what we do with the land now, right? We have a path where families can pay for their land, and then they own that land as an asset, and then they're able to use that asset to go get a home loan. Um, and so and so then we also learned about putting in infrastructure, and in our opinion, not being reliant on the government to do that, because governments usually take too long, and they're never on time. And so we figured out how to use an investment fund, and we do the infrastructure now, and we buy the land now. And so that's a lot to say. Over a decade, you learn a lot as you go, and then it's up to you as the entrepreneur. How do you piece those puzzle? How do you put those pieces together for your future puzzle, and your future vision? And so that's clear to me now and our team, but it was not clear 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Absolutely. And I even think, there's something to be said to have the patience to navigate puzzles like that. We had a mentor years ago who basically told us, like, your business plan is never a final draft. Like, it's always being revised, based on economics, based on season, based on services, all these sort of things. And I think one of the things that I've admired about y'all is y'all have been willing to go places others have not, and continue to do so. two questions. I mean, one is just given like how are y'all measuring success and impact within these innovations that you're leading? And then two, just like what are you excited about as far as like thinking about the 10, 20 years? Um, because I think one of the things with land ownership obviously is like that's a generational asset that that there's a long tail in terms of time. Like how are y'all dreaming about that asset for the families experiencing a new story community?
Yeah, I mean the impact side. We're recording this in May of 2025. So our 3-year target is to partner with 10,000 families to own their land and then to be able to build a home on their land. So that's our kind of more near term goal. From what we know, that will be the largest amount over a 3-year period in Latin America. It's definitely not the end goal, but it's a good next milestone for us. And so, um, the coolest thing about it is we've created now a path for an underserved family who currently lives in inadequate housing to participate in a like human-centered capitalism market. And that is really the biggest idea that we've had is how do you create an opportunity where a family who deeply dreams and desires owning their land so they can have it for generations and then building their home on their land, how do you create something that is affordable for that family, and that takes innovation on many fronts. Um, and also, how do you do it in a way that other lenders or people in real estate are incentivized and see an opportunity to do more of this because there's such an unmet big demand, right? And so what we measure success by is families being able to pay for their land. That means it's affordable, and then be able to start building their house, which means they could afford it. So we're bringing these affordable solutions to areas where they currently don't exist. And then the even bigger impact is watching the ripple effect of that, where other maybe it's banks or home builders or developers, they'll see this and they'll say, oh, I didn't realize that you could actually work with this demographic, and it actually is something that could be sustainable and that can have a fair profit to it. And I'm now kind of lighting up and imagining what would it look like to go after this bigger market and bring bring supply. In this case, it's lands and housing and affordable loans to a massively underserved demographic. So that's kind of the big idea there is success being other actors in this like market-based ecosystem um,
Yep.
working on the same thing that we're doing, and we're kind of igniting it and like catalyzing it and kind of getting that engine going. So those are the main things in the short term. And it's been really exciting because we get to now view the families that we work with as customers as opposed to charitable beneficiaries. And there's nothing wrong with charitable beneficiaries. We've done a lot of that. We've evolved out of that model. But the really cool thing about customers is they're making a choice whether they want to buy something or not. And so all the basic great rules of business apply, right? If the product isn't low enough cost, guess what? They're not going to buy it. If you don't do good customer service and have a high NPS, they're not going to stick around. They're not going to have good word of mouth, right? So those are things that are very exciting to me and our team is that we see this massively like millions and millions of households of unserved potential, and we have a chance to go in and like truly be the best in the world at how we deliver great products and great service to them at affordability and at excellence that currently doesn't exist. So that's what I get very excited about for the long term.
I think one of the interesting parts about this conversation, and this will be the last question, is for that 24-year-old
Yeah.
who's trying to architect an idea. And maybe they're balancing innovation, maybe they're balancing risk, maybe they're balancing a checkbook and, and a daunting idea sort of in front of them. Um, how would you encourage them to wrestle with what they should do? Because again, the patience for a 10-year vision that in a lot of ways is still just beginning. It takes a certain type of endurance uh, to make that kind of decision. How would you encourage them?
Well, I'm biased because I think if they have something that has captured their imagination, that's a beautiful thing, and that's usually a gift, right? So the first thing I'd start with is say, don't don't try to force it. The last thing you want to do is try to force something, right? So forcing something would look like, I really want to be an entrepreneur, or I really want to be a visionary, and I go search for things, right? That's a different flow than something coming to you more naturally, or from a faith perspective, feeling like it's coming from God, or it wasn't just like, you're not like forcing it, right? So I think if you have something that is not forced, then the best thing to do is just to try to get started very small on it, right? So for us, when I had the original concept for News Story, I'm not exaggerating. We literally said, let's try to do this for one house. So the kind of mantra would be, dream big but start small. And when you set a smaller achievable goal, so in our case it was one house, and this was back in Haiti, and the house cost $6,000, right? So it was an easy task, but it was a doable task for a determined, formidable person. Was a $6,000 home, right? And dude, we worked nights and weekends trying to get that first house funded and built. That was it. Like that took us months. And we got it done. And then we set our next goal, which I think was 10 houses. Right. And so the first thing is, start small, set achievable goals that you can get momentum on. And I think that way more people are capable of that than they realize. I think people get way too paralyzed and trying to have everything all figured out before they take a step. Um, and I think the best thing you can do is get started. You need to be smart about it, right? I'm not saying quit your job and do all this like foolish stuff, but like you can get started small. And then the other thing I'd say is, what I learned from my experience is, if you're willing to do something that is different like this, or where you just said, Eric, was something that's more daring, something that's a little out there. What I've learned is that's scarce, right? There's this quote by Peter Thiel that uh, courage is in far shorter supply than genius.
Interesting. Yeah.
Courage is in far shorter supply than genius, and I think that's so true. And that's been a lot of my story, honestly. I'm not the smartest. I'm not a lot of these things, but I figured out at a younger age that you have the agency to do stuff, and to go out there and to be different. And when you're being different, what that's doing is it's attracting the types of people or resources that a normal person wouldn't be able to attract. And so if you can start doing that at a younger age, you're going to have so many advantages, because almost nobody else is doing it. And you don't have to have all these, you know, long lists of prerequisites and fancy degrees, and spending time in all these innovative companies. You can do it at a younger age to get started. And that was certainly our journey when we were 24 and 25-year-old kids.
Yep. I love it, man. Well, Brett, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for for me, it's always energizing to be around you. I think it's challenged me in the best of ways, and I think this conversation is going to challenge a lot of people too.